The opinions expressed in this video are purely those of one mildly entertaining gamer and do not represent those of Creative Assembly, other YouTubers, presidential candidates, ESPN, CNN, Fox News, Hollywood, Knights Templar, or the Illuminati. So first of all, let me address the elephant in the room. Creative Assembly deserves a lot of the criticism they've had leveled at them in recent months. Less content for higher-priced DLCs, half-assed support, and taking their customers for granted, and in some cases treating them disrespectfully, are not good business decisions, and we can only hope that there have been some important lessons learned. Secondly, Warhammer 3 is far from perfect. The game engine really needs improvements. That aforementioned half-assed support has a backlog of bug fixes to get through, and some of the races and factions have clearly been ignored and are in desperate need of a facelift. But, having said that, I'm here to argue that Warhammer 3 is actually a really, really great game. I think we as the Total War player community have somewhat lost the forest for the trees. I want to be clear that I'm not victim blaming. Despite CA's ludicrous statement to the contrary, players have every right to be critical of the flaws of the games they buy and the business practices of the company taking their money. I think it's a good thing that a message has been sent, loud and clear, reflecting the overwhelming dissatisfaction of the player base. But taking a step back from the controversies, there is still an excellent game here, one that I personally have over 1,000 hours in, not even including time on Warhammers 1 and 2, and I know a lot of other players have far more than I. And that's because, despite the flaws, it's still a marvelously fun game. I've been playing Total War games since the first Medieval, which at the time instantly became one of my favorite games of all time. I studied history and military strategy in college, and suddenly I was able to step into the role of Commander-in-Chief and Battlefield General in the same game. It was a formula that worked so well that the same idea was replicated again and again, year after year, title after title. And it's a formula that still works today. But is it an evolutionary improvement over previous titles? Does Warhammer offer anything that the historical titles don't? As much as I love the Medievals, the Romes, and Shogun 2, all my personal favorites, there's no question the Warhammer series is an evolutionary step forward. When you think about flying units, the use of magic, giant monsters, or truly heroic heroes, there are unquestionable advances in the formula. This is not to say that those things should necessarily appeal to everyone. I know several people who prefer the realism of the historical titles, and even I get the urge to go back and play them for a refreshing change of pace from time to time. We may not all like the direction Total War has gone in every particular detail, but we can't deny their bold innovations that advance the series faster and further than any previous titles had. And there's more in other ways, much more. I love Shogun 2, but the biggest variety between campaigns mostly comes down to starting position. In Rome, playing as Carthage felt different than playing as the Gauls, but nothing like the difference between playing dwarves versus Skaven or vampire counts versus lizardmen. This is the true glory of Warhammer 3. There are 24 races in the game, and they play dramatically differently. Then, even within the same race, we have faction leaders with their own unique traits and abilities that expand the diversity even more. There are annoying problems, for sure. My personal biggest gripe is that units sometimes ignore or forget their orders, whether it's ranged units who refuse to fire or flying units that refuse to attack. Thankfully, there are mods that help alleviate these issues, and while that's not as good as CA fixing them, it does at least allow us to continue playing until they're properly corrected. The AI is also very exploitable, and I can understand why a lot of players get tired of the game when they lose that sense of challenge. This can be trickier, but as anyone who has watched my Let's Play series knows, it's not really an issue for me. I long ago realized that most video games have exploits, and it's not hard to simply not use them. I love fighting battles, getting immersed in the tactics, watching my strategies pay off or fall flat. Front lines colliding, archers and artillery firing from behind, cavalry slamming impactfully on the flanks or in the rear. Especially memorable are those times when things go south, the strategy fails, and you as the general have to salvage the situation with quick thinking and reallocation of reserves. None of that can happen when one takes advantage of the AI to make it behave in unrealistic ways, firing all its ammunition at an unhittable target, or using half its own army to chase an uncatchable unit. That being said, there's a fine line between good tactics and exploits, and we all have our own preferences in this regard. I want to be careful not to make it sound like those who play differently are playing wrong. This is, after all, a game, and we should all enjoy it the way we like. I am, however, suggesting that it's not hard to minimize most of the flaws and maximize enjoyment of the game. In a perfect world, of course, there wouldn't be any exploits to ignore. But since the day they make a smarter AI is the day the human civilization as we know it comes to an end, I'll happily accept this version as long as we have it. A lot has been said about the factions being unbalanced. My take on this is an unequivocal good. I don't expect them to be. I remember the days of Medieval 1 when Denmark started with a single province to the Holy Roman Empire's too many to count. Those factions weren't balanced, but they did provide a different game experience depending on what you felt like playing. I see Warhammer factions in much the same light. They should have unique strengths and weaknesses. I don't think the dwarves would be improved with a higher replenishment rate, and I think giving them one would be immersion breaking. I would imagine that long-lived but slow reproducing races who put a lot of time into training their soldiers would be slower to replace those who fall on the battlefield. I say embrace the differences between factions. It just adds to the replayability. When you add in all the additions and changes that the fantastic modding community provides, I see no reason why my 1,000 hours won't turn into 2. Anyway, you get the idea. Maybe I just felt that with the overwhelming negativity that's been surrounding this franchise recently, it might be helpful to try to put some of those valid criticisms into a larger perspective. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and whether you agree or disagree, thanks so much for listening. I'll see you in the next one.